In the Darkness I See by Anon Y. Chapter 1. A Lifetime of Questions. Part 3. I began sweating, my limited time and narrow path finally vivifying me. In a semi-fugue state, in my seat, over the original words of my note, I wrote the following new sentiment. As we each aged, the roles simply reversed. One thing remained constant, however. Neither of us could ever place our history at one another's feet and forgive each other's transgressions. I always thought it was your place, beckoned by fatherhood. I suppose you believed that, as your son, I needed to adapt to your will to survive. Your survival instinct had been solidified through the grueling life you had lived, of course. We always remained closely distant, separated by the ambiguous translucency of resentment. Neither of us were able to love ourselves enough to forgive. Each of us was too selfish to suspend our moral disbelief for even a minute. Our separation by force left me down and you disappointed. As those words churned within my mortified stomach's remaining tranquility, and the preacher found the last of his words, I felt that nothing had been said by either of us. I needed desperately to express by compression. As my nose stung and my eyes reddened, I felt as my poetic license was suddenly let loose by my scholarly pride's rugged grip. There was simply too much else in the moment for my ego to battle. Over the paper's rear original words, I crafted a poem in honor of our troubled time together. When the time came for me to speak in front of all our lost soul friends and family, I couldn't eulogize my father with such a real portrayal of his disappointing despondency towards me. I spoke quickly and non-impactfully at the podium. Afterwards, however, I crept my way up to his casket and whispered my real message to him. I softly spoke the following poem off my damp, scribbled-out page. A man of few words, a man of few lies. His heart set, his heart flew. I knew not of my father's love, I knew not of my father's favor. His heart set, his heart stone. Lost to us, lost on me, my heart set, my heart flew. All I wanted was more, all he could do was less. My heart set, my heart stone. I remember him as he was, memories so misguided. Our heart set, our heart stone. Our heart set, our heart stone. A small surge of intoxicating sadness simmered solemnly under my breath as I uttered each word. Silent and dead, he could finally just listen. I smiled. The radiating freedom that I felt in that moment with him, reminiscent by opposition of our disconnection, never left me. Stuck in amazement at the finality of that moment, I thought, our pain, could it have really meant something? That ghastly and grandiose question was to dwell with me for months after the funeral. I knew it in my very breath. His life, filled with slow demise, body and mind, and stained with tragically sparse condolences, troubled me all at once. His spirit's descent or ascent, inscribed with torment, finally made me cry. Still standing over him, I dropped my apathetic thoughtfulness and sobbed. The moistest part of me wanted just one glimpse of joy to leak auspiciously from his bound eyes. Like jackals behind the thick sternness of the baobab, taunting but never revealing, his eyes remained closed, trapped in some eternal game of inconsolable misfortune. It was never his choice to be plagued in such a manner. It had been a begrudging acquiescence. My father wished to be cremated. He longed to be free, not bound to the tradition of his homeland. He needed to be untied from the earth that had cursed him so constantly. Floating above it all, he yearned for his ashes to frolic with the birds. An avid owl enthusiast, He wished for the air to carry him amongst his favorite creatures. My mother, stubbornly orthodox, had him buried. That stinging truth added layers to my sadness. On his eyes, I remained intractably entranced. Still standing over his desecration, I returned to thought. Like the Eastern take on purpose, or rather a lack thereof, my father's life had only been about the transference of energy through him. Summing up life as a collection of linearized eventualities, he had remained unmoved. That was never my take on the matter. My father could never accept his own brilliance as a part of the universe. The comparative complexity of life always zoomed the focus far from him, just how he had liked it. Reality's energy, continuously transferred through all matter and antimatter, had all been novel and individual only to him. From the shifting gravel beneath his feet to the collapsing star 10 billion miles away, the marvelous wonder of it all had been a part of him, but never he a part of it. Ever since I had thought to have known better, I had mostly ignored his refusal of life. While he lay there on his swollen back, however, it all seemed different. I eventually departed from his eyelids and thought through a clear message. Upon the blackened note, I wrote out my final testimony. The messy note barely read as follows. With all of it adding and all of it subtracting, entropically and enthalpically morphing, a zero-sum game always emerges. It remains separate from him, my father. His attempts to encapsulate and understand that quandary combined at the end of his life to form an insurmountable obstacle for him, and so the unraveling of his acerbically scientific mind ensued. The gravity of the counter-undertaking was too lofty too, leaving him to rampage within the confines of his mammalian brain. His lasting words were not him. My father, all in all, derived 30 or so moments of happiness within his life, mostly unearned and thus brilliant strokes of fortune they were. I laugh at his choice of depravity with such an understanding of his inconsequentiality. The essence of the universe, unchanged and undisturbed, rests peacefully with and without his consciousness. My father chose darkness. Remaining above my father's horizontal constitution, deeply rough, I asked for one thing from the universe. I was desperate to learn from that burdened man. I looked back upwards from my note, meeting his eyeline. With tears pooling up and vision blurring, I begged for the strength to uplift my family's name. The entire church sat breathlessly as I seemed to lose my mind. With my father's unencumbered truths rolling through my fragile mind, my mournful eyes zoomed out and gazed at the rest of his pale face. Through his eyes, I had ventured into the future, past, and present, his mentality mediating my perception. In his weak and fragile face, though, I found him, alone with me. I tucked my ink-soaked paper into his pant pocket and sat down, releasing the rest of the church from their combined panic. The remainder of the funeral fell flat upon me, and I paid little mind to those around me who pretended as though they mourned for his lost life. I mourned the life he had found and mangled into devastation. After that moment, past all the pain, I took his end to call for a new life. While my spirited nihilism viewed my downtrodden and damaged dad as an excuse for negativity, a manifestation of my own personal suffering, the rest of me took his death to shine glorious hope upon my future. As I sat upon my piece of pew, my father's sad excuse for a life, braved rather than lived, came to instantaneously mean that there was a reference place and a poignant hallmark of a way not to be. His shift from energy transference to dissipation meant that I was finally able to peer upon his life studiously and analyze every part of what had turned the unbridled human spirit of a joyous young boy into a truly depressed man. With that keystone remembrance in mind, and in accordance with optimistic thinking, I created a mental field guide for the everyman in me. After my revisitation of false depression ceased, I asked my mother for a cloth napkin. She reluctantly presented my new notepad. I thanked her softly and began writing. I again wrote furiously, crafting a short summarizing message to serve as some value that I could hold true and onto. After completion of my note, and just before us strong youths carried my father off, I folded up the note and pinned it alongside his symbolized idols, the note's practically perfect memorization jammed into my mind. Clustered on his lapel, a thorned rose, my moribund message, and a golden dough-scale pin peacefully adorned his corpse. I was resolutely happy that, in addition to my extemporaneously dense scribble note, I was able to add my memoir to us. The note was wild, primarily summarizing one of the philosophical fragments from my father's dying work that had transmuted terribly into inner verbal trouble within me many nights earlier. Also, within it was just what we as I needed in the form of a multi-permutation instantiated and recollapsed, projected and portrayed compound contrition piece, precisely piercing and pipingly personal. The seemingly misplaced and stepwise abstraction-layered thing writ was alive and ecstatic. It grinned at me and through us. The note read as follows. We are all here against our will, gulping down the gigantic pills of existence, dry and awkward. All of us must remember that this is just another unsympathetic iteration of life, certainly mirrored on some other planet many light years away. While the knowledge of this steals the vitality of our actions from us, it offers us a beautiful gift. Though shrouded in our confused physiology and psychology, we are gifted with freedom, the freedom from the eternal unconscious damnation of our life force is to be received joyously, not scoffed at. This transformation from a victimized martyr to a grateful individual offers a great calling to those whose path has led them to the search for truth. This realization of greatness and one's gravitation towards its enormity dismantles hedonism's virtue cloak. Without this movement towards greatness, all Epicurean power is shackled from the gates of some false Eden, and the serpentine slithering of our internal savage leads us to hell on earth. It sinks its horrible fangs, those spurious sabers, into the nihilists across the world. Human history is thus forever dented. The overtaking of traditional values has come and gone. Like some lost art form collecting dust, virtue has been reduced to its skeleton. This ancient chassis, from which the intellectuals may affix their strings, acts as the perfect marionette to guide the swarms of people into subservient blindness. Unchecked in power and corruption, eventually the string puppet falls to the trenches of justice. This renewal occurs only after millions fall under its reign, as per usual. Even those who stave off the allure of this puppet, but do nothing to expel it, or drag nose first along with them, truly signifying their insignificance. The central dogma of philosophy is tumultuous and confusing. Be wary of its manipulative capacity. The realm of ethics has been stripped of its stability. Once bound by the consistency of religious faith and reason, but no longer squeezed here, ethicality itself is currently under new management. Here's a fun example. If one man can indulge in homosexuality and proclaim pride, then why not do the same for rape, murder, or incest? The bending of one rule to suit the ideologues of change must always crumble the pillars upon which the old world had been built, and thus the new world atop it, too. Though scholars and bureaucrats convince the people of their maintained grasp on civility and morality, whilst boasting its flexibility, we are lost. With flamboyant obscenity, the common man finds himself blind and alone. Do not be like my father. That is the truth. I almost cried hard, but held my breath for the silence of its insistence, and below my last words something came over me to be included. Transcribing by way wrists and fingers faultful, I wrote into written close to right into the left bottom soft and intensely illegible edge of my makeshift note the followings. Equivocation of sin, I scribed hurriedly, at the last moments closest to my father. Hurriedly. I, stupefied, stupid, I hurried to write. Within that note's last couple of centimeters, barely squared, the last sentence, and it read, "Stiff rules because are manifestations, same abstraction ordering of self and unity, limit and love." The note, my disguised, obscure goodbye, was refastened, and my father's body was finally buried. All that suffering still ripe to become. Like I had predicted and unthoughtfully but knowingly witnessed in me hours before, that slight thud of that damn box did it to me. It was and much had been the decided moment every person pleased surely has too, where we presciently believe it to be the peak, the zenith of all things connected most and more, and that moment to be the nucleation point, the pre-punctuated point of wished decision to allow that overwhelming of our little me. As, was, is, absolute always, it came with the mountainity of nothing else but few survivable moments. An exulting cry and tremendous shudder burst from my post-deserted mouth and body and again something happened to or for or more than me. To my knees with the grace of absolute destiny, I spine and contra-right arm tinglingly dropped. This has been Chapter 1, Part 3 of In the Darkness I See by Anon Y.